evening, everybody, and welcome to another session on Untold Truths, stories that we speak about here. Tonight is another opportunity for us, specifically having a very special guest with us tonight. It's our opportunity in the next hour to make sure that we leave this world a better place than we found it when we started this hour. So that's what we're going to try and do with myself and our very special guest. And hopefully, you will also gain some much needed insight into what we will be talking about tonight. But most important, it's really, really a big evening for me to introduce to you one of my favorite people in the world, literally sitting a whole world away from me. Hopefully, that will change sometime soon. So, everybody, let's welcome with us tonight Dr. Robin DiAngelo.
Thank you.
How's it, Robin?
It's wonderful to be with you, a beloved friend and colleague and comrade in the struggle.
Yes,
So
yes.
thank you for inviting me.
Yes, absolutely. It's so amazing to have you here. Just to give, for those who don't know, give you some idea. Dr. DiAngelo is a affiliate associate professor of education at the University of Washington. Her area of research is whiteness studies and critical discourse analysis, tracing how whiteness is reproduced in everyday narratives. She has numerous publications and books, including Is Everybody Really Equal? An Introduction to Key Concepts in Critical Social Justice Education, co-written with Alzam Senzoy, which received both the American Educational Studies Association Critics' Choice Book Award and the Society of Professors of Education Book Award in 2018. She continues to describe that in my efforts to uncover how race has shaped my life, I have gained deeper insight by placing race in the center of my analysis and asking how each of my other group locations have socialized me to collude with racism. In so doing, I have been able to address in greater depth my multiple locations and how they function together to hold racism in place. So that's just a small introduction to Dr. Robin DiAngelo. More importantly, she's also the author of White Fragility, which was groundbreaking for me, but I also know for many people in the world. And then the reason why we're here tonight is her latest book, which is another favorite for me. And this is what we'll be discussing tonight: Nice Racism. So I hope you are fully strapped in because we're about to take that ride. Robin, I hope that you are ready for this and you are gearing up to go. So without any further ado, unless you want to share anything that's burning, no, you ready? Let's
I'm
go.
ready.
Let's go. So let's start right at the beginning. What is a nice racist?
I am a nice racist. You are looking at a nice racist. So let me explain. I am a well-meaning, liberal, progressive white person who was raised in a racist society, who inevitably internalized racist messages, assumptions, perspectives, who has been privileged and advantaged by being raised in that society in which racism is the foundation and structured across all institutions, policies, practices, norms, culture. And so I'm not a white nationalist, I often say. So my expression of my socialization into this racist system is not going to look like that, but it has to look like something. There's no way I could have been exempt, and there's no way I was exempt. Yeah. And so what do the forms of racism that I enact look like? That is my lifelong question. It's a question I would offer to any other well-meaning, really nice, really open, progressive white person listening right now. We're not outside of this. And while I don't mean to minimize the seriousness of white nationalism and extremists, I actually think nice racists like me cause the most daily harm to people of color. And I'll just pass that right back to you and see what you'd like to pick up from that.
I cannot agree with you any more than you just did there. I think people that come across as the nicest people in the world, that's there to hug, love, and support you, but deep down they have this um, uh, deep rooted, so that socialization that you speak about, where they are in opposition to people of color. So I think and that's why I like this concept of nice racist, because most of these people that have these racist tendencies are nice people. You won't think that they feel some negative way about you in a way that will affect you as a person, but that is the reality of the case. So we often, people in circles where we speak about social justice and we work on this topic, we tend to want to say we like the racist that's completely in your face and out there, because with them at least you know where you stand,
Yes.
versus when you're dealing with all these undercover nice racists, you don't know who you're dealing with until it's too late and they've committed harm towards you, and then we have to start that process either of repair or to just remove yourself from that type of situation. So I agree 100% with you, but it's also good. I like that you are pointing the finger at yourself and shining the light on you, because a lot of times people like yourself, you have gained some notoriety and some power, and so you get to dictate the narrative of whether you become racist or not, in some sense, but you choose to put yourself out there as a racist. So I like that. I like that.
Well, and if there are any white people listening right now who are shocked or unsettled, um, if you are, I would offer that you may be hearing what I'm saying as I consciously don't like people of color, and I intentionally am interested in harming them. And if that was what I was saying, I would agree that that is a shocking thing to say, and it's a somewhat offensive thing to say.
Yeah.
So that's not what I'm saying. I'm not talking about individual conscious, intentional malintent across race, but because we've been taught to think of racism in that way, it really functions beautifully to obscure our own collusion with it, right?
Yeah.
So in some ways, you were saying it's easier to be with someone who is explicit in their racism because you know where they're at and you know how to protect yourself, and that you don't know where mine's going to come out or how it's going to come out. And actually, either do I in many ways.
Yeah.
Because it's a kind of worldview. So let me give you an example. How often have you heard a white person who you tried to tell that they have just said or done or made an assumption that is harmful to you across race, and they've insisted that you misunderstood them?
Yeah.
That it's a matter of misunderstanding. So let's unpack that, because that's a classic nice racist response, right?
Yeah.
What are the underlying assumptions? Well, it had to be a misunderstanding on your part because it is not possible that I could have done anything racist, right? And notice the lack of humility in that, as opposed to actually, you might even understand what I did or said or what I really meant perfectly. Yeah. But what I don't understand is how what I did or said or assumed is informed by a deeply internalized racist worldview, which I inevitably have. So it's a lack of humility in the face of the reality that we've been socialized into this. I love the way Ibram X. Kendi puts it. He says, we may not be the producers of racist ideology, but we've all been the consumers. Yeah. Now, as soon as I say that, right? Yeah. So we've all consumed it. I imagine some white people saying, yes, and they've consumed it too. Yeah. And they're just as racist as I am, right? Or as we are. So let me take that on. Absolutely everybody is prejudiced. okay, now we're talking about race. So everybody has racial prejudice or bias. It's just, again, it's just not possible not to absorb that. So you could have racial prejudice against me because I'm white. You could automatically assume X, Y, and Z about me, which would probably be safe to assume because I am white, but nonetheless. And that would be bias. It would be automatic, unearned. You just assumed that about me. But it would not be racism, because sociologists reserve that term to include the profound impact when a whole group's collective bias is backed with legal authority and institutional control. Yeah. Right. So the impact of your bias towards me, it's isolated. It's in a moment. I could easily avoid ever experiencing it. And let's be honest, most of my life, I've been warned to avoid ever having to interact with you in a way that would cause me to experience it. Yeah. Right. I have that choice. Right. I mean, I do live in a good neighborhood after all. Yeah. Right. My kids go to a good school. So, I'm going to have limited interaction with Black people.
Correct.
But your group is not in a institutional position to enact policies that would impact not only my life, but every other person's life who's like me. Yeah. And so, no, they're not just as racist as we are. They're just as biased as we are.
Correct. And I think that's an important point that you are touching on, because specifically in South Africa, we have a different demographic than we do in the US, where we are majority Black country, and our leadership and our government is a Black government, and yet racism still persists in this country. So if we go by that logic, it shouldn't be happening in this country, because we have a small minority of white people. But it just shows you the power of white supremacy and racism, and how it almost metamorphoses over the years, and to change itself every time, so that it still favors and brings white people and white privilege to the fore. And Black people have never had the power to bring forth a system where one race was completely denied all these opportunities to be superior to others. And I think that's the difference that people sometimes don't fully understand and grasp in terms of that conversation.
Yeah, these systems are not fluid. They don't just change direction. Now they're highly adaptive, and they will adapt to changes. And that is not to downplay that in one area of the many that racism manifests, there may be more people of color than there are white people. But it's not about numbers. It's about collective power across a whole range of institutions and systems. And I would add that Black people absorb anti-Black messages just like white people absorb those messages, and can perpetuate anti-Blackness against one another. Colorism is a great example of that, right? Yeah. But ultimately, who does that hold up and who does that push down? Who does it serve when you take up against each other? When you fight amongst yourselves, when you fight over some hierarchy of who's closer to white and who's less close to white, it still collectively serves, and I'll just say the phrase, white supremacy. The idea that white people are the standard for human, the representation of what it means to be fully and ideally human. And that circulates globally. Right. Yeah. And it affects all of us in different ways. And that's why for each of us, our question should be not if I've been shaped, if I participate, but how do I participate from the particular position I'm in?
Yeah, I think it brings me to my next question, because you obviously wrote the book, Nice Racism, because you felt there's a need to address this type of situation that we are discussing right now. And then the question is, you tend to generalize when you're speaking about white people. Now, I like the fact that you speak about white people, because that's who you represent. That's your group. So when you say it, it's valid. Nobody can deny it, because you're white. And that's amazing. So that's why I think that's already a start to say that you're allowed to generalize. But please explain to us, you wrote the book, why do you generalize about white people, and why do you think you're allowed to do that?
Well, it's not that I don't get some pushback about it, but yeah, I think one of the very first chapters I knew I had to take on is, why is it okay to generalize about white people? So keep in mind that we're talking about a collective system, right? We're talking about the cultural water that we're all swimming in. And one of the advantages of being white is getting to be seen as an individual. Right. I am not seen as representing my race. Nobody says, Robin, my white friend, at least not in any kind of mainstream situations, but you're always going to be marked as not white. So the default is going to be white unless it's marked as other. And then it will always be at this kind of a subtext is less than. Right. Which is why white people will drop their voices when they say black, as if they're saying something shameful. Right.
Yeah.
Where it's almost drives us crazy not to be able to say that you're black or a person of color, right? Like, we need to make sure that we mark that.
Yeah.
And so to interrupt that, to challenge that, is a really important interruption into white supremacy, right? The privilege of getting to be seen as individuals, like someday, hopefully we will all be seen as individuals. But because we're not there, and only one group is really granted that, it's a good practice to break that and to push white people to struggle with the collective experience. We don't like to struggle with the collective experience. I want to be exceptional. And I make sure you've noticed. I want to make sure you know all the ways I'm different from every other white person. So let me be really clear. Of course I am different. Of course, I am an individual and unique and so on. And I'm also a member of this group that we could literally predict whether my mother and I were going to survive my birth, just based on the fact that I'm a member of this group. We can predict how long I'm going to live, just based on the fact that I'm a member of this group. And we have to be willing to look at that, to stop excusing or exempting ourselves. And so what I would offer to white people who are thinking about all the ways they're an exception, I had a black roommate in college, and my child plays on a diverse sports team, or his coach is black, or, I volunteered in the townships, or, all the ways we want to say that we're different. I would just offer you this question. How has being white shaped how you experience any of those things you think make you different? Right? Because it's a part of it. So I'm just asking us to be willing to grapple with the collective and to stop focusing on the exception. There's exceptions to every rule, but there is a rule. Let's look at it.
Yeah. And more often than not, that rule applies generally to black people as a collective. That's just the standard. We are never exceptionalized. Yeah. We are never put out as the one. We are always grouped as this whole. But it's interesting because it brings me to this next question that I want to ask, because I don't know what's the problem, Robin. I don't know why you have a problem with niceness. What's the issue with niceness, Robin? Here in South Africa, I have a lot of people, and they probably, some of them on this call, and some of them that I know, they're very nice people. They're white, they're nice. I like them. We get along. We even go hang out sometimes, and life's good. We cool. And they're nice. So, Robin, what's wrong with white people being nice, eh?
Well, just before I answer that, I want to say, because you just, before we went there, you were saying that black people also are always seen as a collective. And I want to be really clear that because we're in different positions structurally, the strategies are different. So while for white people, it's healthy to be willing to look at the collective experience, for black people, it's healthy to be able to be seen and responded to as an individual. I just wanted to be really clear, because we tend to think everything should be applied equally, as if, we're all on the same kind of place. No, so what's wrong with niceness? So first of all, please be nice. I wish social media was a little nicer. So niceness is great. But niceness and anti-racism are not connected, right? Niceness doesn't indicate the absence of racism, right? Niceness is not courageous. It doesn't really require very much. Anti-racism requires a great deal. And I want to distinguish between niceness and kindness. Kindness is more active, right? I actually do something that improves or contributes or supports you. So I think of an example. You have a flat tire, you're on the side of the highway, and kindness is I stop and I help you. And niceness is I smile warmly as I drive by. And I wish you the very best. Okay.
I can see that. Yeah.
But a culture of niceness tends to be, first of all, a white dominant culture. It is a conflict avoidant culture. Conflict will be seen as not nice. Conflict will be seen as a breach in the social contract. And therefore, of course, conflict will come out passive aggressively. It'll come out, but it will not come out directly and honestly. It'll come out in all the back channels. And the very things that many white people would say make for a nice culture are exactly the things that say to you as a person of color, do not be yourself, do not be authentic, do not be real, do not challenge me, keep smiling, be nice no matter what comes at you. If you are not nice, then you are angry and too difficult and have personal problems. And we tried to include them and it just didn't work out, right? So a culture of niceness tends to be a blanket on the kinds of discomfort, the kinds of difficult conversations that we're going to need to have for a while until we get to a different place where niceness is actually an authentic thing. A lot of organizations, when they start this work, suddenly these conflicts rise to the surface. And they interpret that as, see, we didn't have these problems before you came here and started talking about this. What I'd say is us coming and talking about this finally opened some space where people thought they could actually maybe share what they really feel and think, as opposed to, swallow it. And then you wonder why I live longer, right?
That's very interesting, because I think you're hitting on so many amazing points where we can see the correlation, even because it transcends any country or any borders that has been put up. Because if you look at even in South Africa, there's a big requirement from people that you act nice and decent and respectable towards people. So even when you are offended, you need to be nice in how you enact your anger and your rage, because you're not allowed to become the angry black person, because automatically the white supremacist system will then find you guilty. Just guilty by the color of your skin, because of your outrage, even though there's just been some form of injustice committed to you. And I think that is one that I think it transcends all worlds that we operate and function in. But specifically, it's this thing where you also can relate to these other worlds, where you're saying that and you're writing it in the book, but it speaks to our context, and your books then again translate what we're experiencing in South Africa as much as it is experienced in France, in Germany, China, as well as in the US, where Black people are just not allowed, or people of color, however you relate to that racial context, we're just not allowed to live ourselves out in the spirit that we feel in that moment. We always have to think about the impact of how we allow our emotions to let or allow us to defend us when we are attacked or anything happen like that. So I think it's important that we speak about this, because for too long we were subdued in how we responded to racist incidents when we are at the center of receiving that type of oppression, suppression, and having to deal with white supremacy. So how do we or what do we say to white people
Right.
in
You
how
know,
they need to respond in those moments?
so I talk about that in white fragility, that white fragility, it's not fragile in the sense of delicate or benign or harmless. It's fragile the way a bomb is fragile. Handle with care, lest you be, exploded on or burned, right? Fragile the way broken glass is fragile. So our sensibilities are fragile. It doesn't take much.
Yeah.
But the impact, of course, because our reactions are backed with the weight of the institution. And in that way, I see that white fragility functions as a kind of everyday white racial bullying, that we actually make it more miserable for you if you try to talk to us about racism. Like we profess to want to know, but if I want to know about them, I don't want to know about me. And if you tell me, often, sadly, things get worse for you, not better. Okay, so that's white fragility. And I had another example of a culture of niceness and how it sits to keep you from. It's a manifestation of white fragility, really.
Yeah.
And that is the common ground rule or guideline: assume good intent. Right.
Yeah.
So let's just assume good intent. And so if I say something that hurts you, you should just assume I'm a good person and meant well, which basically means it doesn't matter that I hurt you. It doesn't count that I hurt you. All that matters is that I'm a good person, right? So what we're really saying is disregard the impact of my actions, right? So when I see that ground rule, I walk over to it if it's on a list and I put a comma, right? Assume good intent, comma, but focus on impact.
Yeah.
Take responsibility for the impact. Yes, you
Yeah.
didn't mean to do that. Okay, whatever. You did it and it hurt me. And I need to see that you recognize that and are willing to repair that. That is what's going to build trust, not you pretending. Well, actually, Edwin, how convinced are you by white people insisting that whatever happened wasn't actually racism?
Not convinced at all.
Okay. So the other thing you brought up was the South African context. And I understand the point you're making is even these conversations, we have to be strategic, right? I'm always thinking, how are white people going to dismiss this?
Yeah.
And one of them is, she's American and it's different here, and she doesn't know what it is here. And all I could say is, yes, the culture and the history are different in different countries, but what about the outcome? The outcome is consistently the same. And I've been asked to speak to white people worldwide. Mostly people of color ask me to speak to white people because the dynamics are the same. So I think it's on each and every one of us to apply the analysis to our situation. I mean, I can't possibly know every nuance of every culture. That's your work, right? But the main thing is, don't use that as an excuse to dismiss the analysis out of hand.
I think before we got cut off there, I wanted to speak about the fact that this also what we were referring to before in terms of the niceness and how it impacts us differently from where people think it impacts us differently, whether we're in South Africa or whether we in the US or whatever part. I think a lot of the fragility that comes up in why white people bring their defenses up has to do with the shame of accepting your role and your responsibility in being oppressive towards people of color. So I think because of that shame, that guilt that white people have to deal with, we have to find a way once and for all for white people to become more comfortable and live with the discomfort of owning that they are on the negative end of the racism continuum, and then working towards that positivity, because you cannot expect to be white and not be understood to be having the power to oppress or suppress or make people of color feel less than because you were thought to do something like that. So instead of coming up with the defenses and the fragility, deal with the shame, the discomfort, and try to learn better ways to deal with this. So how would you then say that, Robin? Dealing with niceness, how would you speak to people to that?
I hope that I am somewhat of a model. I have been from the time we opened this conversation, owning that I am a part of this system, owning that I am a nice racist, that it manifests. And I hope I'm also coming across as a fairly empowered person. I'm not immobilized by shame. I don't struggle with guilt. Why? I didn't choose to be socialized this way. I would never have chosen it. And it's actually incredibly liberating. It's liberating. And it's transformative to just start with the acceptance and the premise that, of course, you've internalized it. Of course, you're part of it. And now you can kind of breathe, stop defending and denying and, using all that energy to twist yourself in knots to get out from under it. There's no face to save, and now you can actually get to work trying to identify how it's manifesting and change that. So while this is a process and a journey I'll be on for my life, I'm never going to be free of this conditioning, because even as I push against it, it keeps coming back. It's 24/7, circulating all the time. I'll never be free of it, but I have skills that I never had before. I have relationships I never had before. And I can confidently say I do less racial harm than I ever did before as a result of this work. So if you want to get further down the continuum, and let me say, instead of seeing it as an either or, just see it as a lifelong continuum. Owning that reality will put you further along that continuum, and not in just a guilty confessional, oh, I'm so racist way, but one that has some action behind it. So maybe another way to say that is, while I didn't choose to be socialized, so I'm not guilty, I'm responsible for the outcome. Here I am at this point as a full adult. And I do want to talk a little bit about shame. Shame is an unpleasant feeling. And move through it. Okay. Don't let it be your excuse. There's a question that's never failed me in my efforts to kind of unpack this. And that question isn't, is this true, false, right, wrong? It's, how does it function? So when I'm stuck in shame, how does that function for me as a white person? I'm immobilized, for one. And for two, it excuses me from having to do anything. And so therefore, it's suspect, it's problematic, and I need to move through it. And I actually think that shame, or at least claims of shame, because I'm just going to say this, white people feel a lot of feelings in these conversations. Which ones are we most likely to share? Shame. So that there's a reason we're more likely to share that we feel shame, because it kind of makes us a victim in a way, right? And it's a way, I think, not consciously, to regain our moral character. See, I feel bad, therefore I'm good. I'm a good person and I feel so bad. And can't you see how good I am? Right? I mean, that's the impact, I think. So I would ask you, Edwin, does that ring true for you when a white person is all bound up in shame about being white? How's that land on you?
Yeah, that doesn't help me at all. It actually turns the table, and I have to carry that burden at the end of the day, because then you lighten your load, but I'm stuck with your problem. Even though we start off with me trying to get you to change your ways so that I can operate in a better system.
Yeah. Nice and succinct.
So I want to ask you, Robin, because there is somebody in this country who is somebody that is well respected for doing the type of work that we do. And I recently at a conference said to this person that I made the statement that all white people are racist, and that people operate on a continuum, and they move be towards anti-racist and being racist, and there's a middle somewhere. And I said to her, can you confirm that this is the global standard that we understand and that we function by? And what she said was very interesting to me, because I didn't rebuttal, because I thought it would have been, again, I was being nice. She's white, and I didn't want to completely throw her under the bus in that moment. But she made this statement, and I would like to get your view on this.
Okay.
She basically said that I have been doing this work for so long, and I don't think that I should continue being described as a racist. I think there should be some room for me to start gaining a different label than racist or being racist and so on. And so I wasn't very impressed with that, because she's deeply rooted into this work, so she understands the things that we are talking about now. But she in that moment claimed a superior position for herself because of undoing what she has been part of committing against Black people. So please talk. This is me being selfish now. I'm throwing my own
Oh, yeah.
in here and gaining my own needs, answering my own needs.
Well, so the first thing I just want to point out is that while that did not sit well with you, you didn't rebut it. Why? Because you knew that you risked a white fragility response. You were acutely aware of the position this woman was in relationship to you. It's somewhat in just the fact she's white and you are not, but also because she's deep in the work and probably has a reputation, so she has status and prestige within the work. So your power positions you were acutely aware of. And I'm pointing that out because so many white people think that if they're not getting feedback, that means there is no problem. And what I would say is if you're not getting feedback, you may have indicated somewhere along the line that you're not open to that feedback. And so that is not actually a good sign. So I just wanted to really amplify that. Because then the question I come up with that I would want to ask her is, how do you know how well you're doing? If right now I can't tell you that I have a problem with your answer, that's not an indication that you're doing really well, right? To start with, I've been doing this work for so long. You know, there's a study that you might appreciate that two researchers did, and they interviewed anti-racist activists. And the activists of color said that their number one source of burnout were the white anti-racist activists. Okay, so just hold that for a second.
Wow.
The number one source of their burnout were the other white anti-racist activists who would not own their own racism, who were deeply invested in this identity as an anti-racist activist, which I think she made clear that she's invested in that identity. And that's even more frustrating and more maddening, right? Because this person should be further along, should be more open. And so I just feel like that a couple of key pieces were missing in her answer, and one was humility, right?
Yeah.
And the other was accountability. So I will acknowledge that there are different frameworks or to this work, and mine is that I'm racist and I always will be, but I can do much less, I can do much better, I can make a difference. That doesn't mean I just give up. But she wasn't operating from that framework. She was operating for what I would call kind of an either or, good, bad. I'm further along than other people. And right there, that's a red flag for me.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that gives me some good insight for the next time I run into her and we have to have a head-to-head. I will definitely use some of these pointers you put up.
I'll share that research with you, and you can say, "Hey, I wonder what you think about this."
Yeah, that would be amazing. I look forward to reading that. I have to point something very critically out, Robin, right now. This webinar is set for 1 hour, and we have almost used up 45 minutes. I mean, wow, that was like boom, and it was 45 minutes. But I mean, the conversation is amazing and I'm loving it. I see there's one or two questions in the comments, and I will definitely see if we can get to that. But yeah, Robin, this is while the conversation is amazing, you say something about um, we aren't actually that nice. So when you say you start out by nice racism, you write a book and you speak about how niceness is enacted by white people, and then you say what is problematic about being a nice racist. But then you also speak to the fact that we're not actually really that nice. So white people isn't actually that nice. They actually acting as if they really that nice. So talk to us about that, because I think I've experienced that continuously, consistently, and I see it so many times where even the close ones that I'm connected to, they're not that nice. When you start digging deeper and the friendship gets older, you start learning some things about people, and then you see, so that was all part of the game. So speak to me about that, Robin.
Yeah, the word that comes up for me is veneer. It's just a very thin veneer of niceness. And let me just add a kind of the earlier question of what's wrong with niceness. It means that the ways that I'm going to enact my racism, my conditioning, are going to be way more insidious, way harder to get your hands on. I'm going to be smiling at your face, but there's a knife in your back, right? You're going to be undermined in the organization in ways that are really hard for you to name, right? And what I have found very often is that when you just scratch on the surface of that niceness, which means you challenge that niceness, right? Suddenly we get kind of nasty, kind of mean. You know, white fragility erupts, and white fragility is can often be really mean and really undermining. I mean, the fact that you knew that you risked it. Now, it's possible that that woman would have responded in an open, reflective way, but you didn't. She wasn't saying anything to you that signaled that, and you didn't want to take that risk. So we'll see what happens next time. And I want to be clear, this is not hopeless, right? I've been in a relationship with you, Edwin, for several years now, and we're still in good relationship. And I don't think that's because you don't think I have any of these patterns, but there's a way in which I am around that reality that enables you to interact with me. Right. Yeah. So it's not 100%. But the most common pattern is we become not nice very quickly when we are challenged.
Yeah. And I think you touching on a very nice point that I would like to share with everybody. Our relationship, my relationship with Robin, has always been, over the many years that we've been friends, colleagues, and working together, you always allow me to call you out on things that I feel I found is part of that racist behavior, or that oppressive behavior, where I feel you haven't treated me fairly, and you always allow that as an open conversation for us. So I think that is something that is not very common with a lot of people and white people that I interact with. But with you, I know I'm always willing, and you ask, you will think about it, and you'll be like, did I just do that, or did I make you feel this way? Please, if I do, let me know, because I want to do better. And I think that is the type of example that I want people to also take away from this, is that when you live in that shame and with that defensiveness, you don't allow yourself to be open to learn and to gain from what people of color have to give. And that's what burns us out, because then we have to go through so many hoops to get you to understand where we're coming from, versus when it comes from you, half of the process has already been started, which is cool, you know?
Yeah. And I want to just add some guidance, though, because sometimes what white people will do is put it all on your shoulders. Like, hey, Edwin, just let me know if I do anything problematic. And now, I can just carry on and you'll let me know. And even though you might let me know, it's not without some risk and some cost. You're having to push across that structural power relationship to give me that feedback and to risk how I would respond. And so it's on us as white people to also get better at recognizing racism and, to educate ourselves continually so that we're also aware, and it's not all up to other people to point that out or to share that. And I've had so many people of color say to me, if I expected you not to ever run racism at me, I mean, that would be a setup for very deep disappointment. Of course, if we're going to work together, it's going to come up. It's going to come out. We're not going to give up on you just because it came out. What we're looking for is where can we go with you when it comes out? And if we can't go any further with you, then we're not going to have an honest relationship. So it's the repair that makes for the authenticity.
Yeah. And I think that put an important point on that in terms of how we also as a community, I think Nadia also said it now in the chat that let me see, it would take a huge burden off the shoulders of people of color if white people would just educate each other about racism, so that people of color don't always have to do that. And I think that that's a critical point, because at the end of the day, it feeds into something that I wanted to throw in here, Robin, at the end of our conversation, but because it's on the table now, I'll just throw it in there. And it's something that for those who are interested, we will be sending out an email about that. But at some point, maybe this year still, I would like to set up a white affinity group training session with Robin, because that is something that is major that Robin is currently doing in the US and other parts of the world. Talk to me about that, Robin.
Yeah. So let me say something about the dynamic of educating each other, right? There's lots of feelings and confusion sometimes about the fact that I'm a white person talking about racism. I think it's very clear that I'm always speaking as a white person to other white people. So in that sense, I'm in my lane. I don't believe that white people can ever understand what they need to understand about racism and their part in it if they're not listening and taking leadership from people of color. I want to be really clear about that. But for far too long, we've offloaded all of that only onto people of color. And I have a piece of the puzzle that's different from the piece you have. You have a foundational piece because you had to understand at a very early age my reality. You had to deal with my reality in a way that I never had to deal with yours. And let's face it, can be seen as qualified to do basically anything in the world without understanding your reality, right? So you have that foundational piece, but I have an insider's understanding that you don't have. So we need it all. And affinity work, I'm a deep believer in. It's just a tool in the process of anti-racist work where we separate by our shared identity. So I would get together with white people, you would get together with folks of color, and even that would be broken down into different groups, and to work on what's specific to our group. So clearly the impact of white supremacy on white people is different than the impact on people of color. I got a message of superiority and you got a message of inferiority. Now we each have to work on those messages, but it's kind of sensitive to do that in front of the other group. You might not want to sit around and watch white people talking about their superiority, right? And you may not want to be vulnerable in front of white people to talk about anti-Blackness and the tenderness of that struggle, right? Yeah. So we separate and we work on what's specific. And I just co-wrote a handbook for facilitating those discussions with white people. Next year, a Black woman is coming out with the handbook for facilitating those with people of color. And then I'm also training facilitators, white facilitators, to lead white affinity groups. Wow. And, I don't know if you know, but there was just a big controversy in the US. I was on Breitbart News. I was on Fox News, not voluntarily, because on a panel, I promoted affinity work. And then they said, Robin DiAngelo is a segregationist. And she thinks that Black people should stay away from white people. And, they called me the Bull Connor of Hollywood. Do you know who Bull Connor was? No. He was a guy during the civil rights movement in the South. He was a real bad white supremacist guy. Anyway, they twisted that for me to say that we should live separate. So I want to be really clear. The ultimate goal is we come together and bridge these divides. But speaking for white people, we're not in great shape. And what a lot of organizations do is they throw white people and black people in a room together.
Yeah.
White people who have never even reflected on the meaning of their whiteness. And then they say, talk about race. And white people are just tromping, metaphorically all over people of color in those conversations. So this is a way to get in a little bit better shape, to build some skills so that when we come together, we have more constructive dialogue.
Yeah. Awesome.
Actually, since you brought it up, here's my book.
There you go. There's the next one. It's coming
up. If you go to my
website,
starting in 3 weeks, we're starting a new series of training white people to lead these discussions. Yeah.
So we'll definitely get in touch with you about all these things, have some conversations about it. And then, between me and Robin, we will work something out for the South African market and see how we can do that. While there's a ton of things to continue discussing, Robin, we entering our last 5 minutes. So I just want to see from the group what some of the conversation was and throw something out to you. This is a question from this is a good friend of mine, Scout. I will be interviewing him also in a couple of weeks, so people should be looking out for that. He is working tirelessly, and he belongs to the Afrikaner group. So the white Afrikaner group, I hope you still remember them, Robin, when we were touring South Africa. But he's asking, there's white fragility, but also white fatigue. Ironically, those who have not engaged much feel they are tired of it. So fatigue as in tired of how this topic makes us feel. So the challenge is not how do we do the work, but how do we get, for example, Afrikaners into the room. So it's that thing about, why are we always talking about this? Why should we always be talking about race and all of this? But how do you get those people to not be tired of the conversation, but to understand that they need to be part of the conversation in order for us to change things, Robin? How would you advise us about that?
So I recognize that this person is your friend and colleague, but I would challenge the language of white fatigue, and I would change it to white apathy and white entitlement. I was talking with Esther Ama, and she was talking about how she works with Black women with the question, where did you learn that you were required to work always? And the question I would offer to white people is, where did you learn that you were entitled not to work? That you were entitled to comfort and rest and self-care? And it's not that we shouldn't be doing that in a way that keeps us going, but that's exactly it. It has to keep us going. Yeah. I actually would be hesitant to ever say to a person of color, I feel fatigued. It feels like a complaint, right? Like if a man said to me, we're talking about misogyny and patriarchy, and he's just like, I just feel so fatigued dealing with this, I would actually say, F you is what I would say. I would. Like, seriously? Oh, you're so tired? No, how about just own it as apathy? You lost your interest. It got too difficult. You didn't want to do it anymore. So figure out, what do I need to put into place to support me to keep going? Because I do need to put things in place to keep going, because it's so seductive as a white person not to do this. I can so easily not do this. You don't even have to know, Edwin, that I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
Right? It's really 24/7 you're doing this? No, you're not. I'm not doing this when I'm watching movies. I bet you are.
Yeah.
Because you're noticing all the narratives in that movie, and I'm just absorbing. So I just want to, I don't know. I hope that was useful.
It was useful. I like entitlement to fatigue. I think, and you rightly link it to what Esther speaks about, and this concept of grinding versus white people and taking their time off and having the freedom to choose what they want to link to their fatigue or where they want to put their energy into. And that again speaks to some kind of privilege. So I hope that that helps. But I also understand within this context that we working in South Africa, how even when you deep down know it's time to say F you then just pull it back, and then you try to be nice because you want you want them to stick around for the
Trust me, I'm already sitting here
conversation.
going, uh-oh. You know, it went on for a whole hour, and then I got a little too real with how I felt. Yeah.
No, but it's that's how really we wanted to be. So I think that that was awesome. Robin, we have absolutely, and everybody that has joined us, this was an amazing conversation. We have literally come to here, we on the last cusp of this moment. And besides reading the book, getting the book, and people obviously hopefully looking forward to us welcome you back into South Africa soon. So that will also, we'll speak about that. Hopefully we can make it happen. I think it will be amazing to have you back. But more importantly, for everybody here, and us staying behind, what would be your words of encouragement for us doing the work? What should we do with the white people in South Africa to get them to be more like Robin DiAngelo?
Oh, gosh. I'm not sure I can answer, but what I would say is change your question from if I've been shaped to how I've been shaped. Just start from the premise that, of course, you have been, and let go of the exception and start examining the rule and what it might look like in your own life. And I'll just repeat, it is a liberating and transformative process. It's not awful. I mean, I do think we as white people should ask ourselves, why are our hearts not breaking? Where is our grief? Where is our anger? You know, where are those feelings? They are in there when you really look at this. But it's not all terrible. Again, I have beautiful relationships I never would have had. I was never raised to even care to have. I have those today because of this work. So hang in there.
There you have it, folks. That was Robin DiAngelo, Nice Racism. And I think it was a wonderful conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will be sending out emails for all our next conversations. We have a long list of people that is coming to talk to you. We spoke about Skalk. We're speaking to Wilhelm Verwoerd. We want to find out what is the Verwoerd name doing in South Africa nowadays. We have Dante King, Robin. We have Dante
Oh,
King coming
wonderful.
up. Dante King is a phenomenal author from the US. He's just blowing up in the US right now. So we're also going to speak to Dante. But for tonight, we had the most impressive and amazing Dr. Robin DiAngelo that gave us so much to think about. So thank you very much. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
you.
Thank you.
Everybody, take care. Have a good evening, and we'll see you again in a few short weeks. Take care.